Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Titanic. So, the one goofy thing about this movie is we're not really surprised about the ending, because the ending is to have been told to us numerous times over before we are to even see this film. Really, when I was in school, I don't know how or why they figure this out, but man, did they go in and really in depth talked about the Titanic, like mentioning about the several different layers of this boat, and telling us that there's certain kind of classes that were in this boat, as if they were like heavily just watching Titanic and like, yeah, let's go and have this thing be a thing we just like teach all these kids because we want to know more about the Titanic, so they need to know more about the Titanic, because maybe they couldn't watch completely the Titanic movie because maybe of some French girls is maybe the reason why we couldn't have exactly seen this film for whatever reason. Or there was probably a number of people that are like, like I took my kids to this film and all of a sudden there's some French girls, let's just say, in this movie. Or maybe at some point, a mother or father or whatever told like their kids, it's like, well, hey, like when I tell you to cover your eyes, you'll do so in this film. So yeah, maybe there was that going on. I thought the weirdest thing about this movie is how many things had covered Titanic for some odd reason. All of a sudden, I would be watching some random movie somewhere, and it would be around the time period that Titanic was to be a thing, which was 1912. And so all of a sudden, we just have miraculously, like, the Titanic being tied to this film. I'm like, please don't tell me these people are going to be getting on this Titanic boat. And sure enough, there was like an animated movie where all of a sudden, like, they tied Titanic in, and I'm like, why are we tying this movie to this boat? This seems so ludicrous. Don't tie the Titanic into stuff. But that was such a huge, massive hit that everybody was like, man, how could we just churn out money for this Titanic thing? And man, was there so many books made? Was there so many like things made out of that? Tying into like, man, if you just have like a ballpark time period, you gotta Titanic and tie it in. So I could say really for this movie, like, I don't know if I could really grade this film and say, like, oh yeah, great film, when it's like, dude, numerous people died in this movie. This is based on a true story, technically, because I don't really think that Jack and Rose are legitimate people that were actually people on this boat. Like, they probably fabricated a lot of stuff. It's based on possibly a true story. And maybe even the Bill Paxton character, who is Brock Lovett, may or may not exist. I don't know. I don't know the accuracy of all of this stuff because I didn't go into the behind the scenes and really going in and how deeply accurate all of this is. But all I know is that robots don't belong on Titanic. That is the one inaccurate thing that I saw in this movie where I was like, there's no robots on Titanic. Titanic? Come on, get something right here. Come on, like, you guys could have done a little bit better on the CGI. Come on. Whatever. But having fun. But yeah, there actually is, when things are going horrifically awry in this movie, there's also a joke that I was dying laughing about, and I felt horrible by me laughing about it. Because I'm like, man, so many people are dying, and all of a sudden there's a joke here that I'm laughing about as people are horrifically dying. Because we have the one guy who goes on and he's like, I will walk in the valley of the shadow of the... And we end up having like Jack's character is like, well, can you walk a little bit faster going to that valley? And I just died. I just like, oh my god, this is hilarious. And like I felt bad for laughing. I felt bad for enjoying this film, and because people like we all know that a unsinkable ship is to of course sink. Like I would have people that would go on in certain kind of shows and break down how exactly the Titanic was to sink, and it all came down to like one little piece that had gotten unhooked that could have made the ship sink a little bit better, but instead, like that one piece was to break off to then have the ship just go into two pieces like it did. Okay, all right, sure, good research. But so we end up having, of course, a lot of nicknames for stuff. We of course have the ship of dreams, which Titanic is. I would much more rather call it a nightmare. And we of course have this blue diamond, or the heart of the ocean or the sea, or a body of water that eventually is going to end up towards the end of this movie because kerplunk. Um, I would say that I could not believe certain characters being in this film. I'm like, isn't that guy from the Lord of the Rings who's murdering this boat right now? Captain Smith? Freaking isn't that guy from Lord of the Rings? Man, you would think for a guy that's been a king at some point. That was well before the Lord of the Rings Thur. That was well before. Anyways, so I'm having fun because this movie is sad. This movie is like a very romantic piece where, of course, eventually we can't help but mind the fact that we're like, French girls. Draw me like your French girls, Jack. You know what? I just want to say one thing. Kate Winslet has to have gone and done a number of films where she has not worn a lot of clothes. Bravo to that woman for always looking amazing. And plus, also, I think simply because of this film, that's what started Kate to consistently go into movies. Where at some point, like, I don't know how many Kate Winslet movies that I've seen. Like, good thing she didn't do anything in Divergent. That would have been weird. But I don't know how many movies that I've seen Kate Winslet not wearing anything in them, and I'm like, bravo to that woman, because like she's always in shape. She's always in shape. She looks great. But anyways, Billy Zane being an a-hole in this film, great for him. The guy who's Cal Hockley, man, and also realizing Billy Zane like goes on to like be the Phantom at some point, and usually is to play the hero in a lot of films, but he plays the a-hole in this one. I'm like, man, like we also have him in Zoolander briefly at some points. But yeah, so with that said, now that I've kind of gone on and kind of rattle off just certain kind of things here, like I would have to call this movie like it of course is a visually interesting, fascinating film for a time period piece. It of course is to be a horrific movie that I can enjoy all the way through weirdly. That makes me sound like a horrible person, but I can enjoy the film. Like, there isn't a piece here where I'm like, man, this movie is just dragging on. It never feels like that. It's weird. For a movie that I'm just like, man, I'm gonna just not like the ending, because of course, this is to build up to be this. Here's the weird and goofy thing. They actually seriously made a Titanic 2. Why? Somebody took the money and the time and the effort to seriously make a Titanic 2. Even Titanier. What kind of goofy people are like, man, they were like, I think there was a joke going around about Titanic 2, but somebody went out of their way to actually do that. Somebody created that film. Uh Man, just the money to burn that people have. But yeah, but that was just Titanic for you. Like it just like it really impacted a lot of people. Weirdly, we had like Avatar that hugely impacted a lot of people, but it's taking forever to do a sequel to a movie that could honestly have a sequel, but it doesn't seem to be going out anytime soon. But yeah, but Titanic is to be the one-off movie that you would have thought at some point would have probably gotten remade for some weird reason. To just like, no, I want to show the kind of the other way of things, or maybe some people will thumb through this movie and realize how inaccurate it is, and so like they'll have a more accurate film where they go into more of the boring stuff about the ship in the film. Like maybe they'll go on and have a much more kid-friendly Titanic film, which sounds weird because people will still die on the ship. Anyways, so with that said, I think let's just go in and let's talk about the thing called the Titanic thing. For this one, I want to mention that there isn't going to be a huge amount of accurate things for my review, mentioning that I'm not going to mention like what exact things are exact things in this movie. Uh, Really, I'm just going to go on and say that like, oh, well, this is a mini sub, and this is a robot, and this, of course, is to be a big, massive ship that they are going on and excavating or exploring or exhibitioning, trying to go like. So the very beginning of this, we have, of course, a submarine or mini sub going after and kind of doing some research on the Titanic with this big massive ship that of course is to or big massive boat, big massive yeah ex- excavating ship. So I call boats ships. I don't know if that's accurate, but I just call them that anyways. So but anyways, let's go into it. Where could you go out of your way to find Titanic? More than likely, you can probably rent it off of Amazon. Right now, there's not a convenient way to say that you can see this movie. I think maybe it might be on like a weird like Sling or something like that. But I can conveniently give you some options that I have to kind of figure out in my mind where exactly to go now. Because I could have possibly given people options, but those free options are kind of a little bit maybe an inconvenience for everybody. So you can go onto a Google search, and there are a number of apps you can probably go and Google search. You can search an app called Letter C Movies, so a letter in a word. Search for this app, and there, in fact, find an app that you can download and be able to basically see almost anything. There is also other apps that you could also go on. You can probably go into Google Store search and search for movie apps, and kind of can scroll through and kind of check on certain apps and just kind of see what best will work for you, which one has Titanic in it. You can watch it from there conveniently at your own home. Or you can also go onto a Google search and dare in fact go on to a app called Play HD TV, and that eventually will be a app where you can go and download that and be able to see a number of things. There was also an app that I conveniently mentioned called Fox HD Movies, where the logo will say so, but the title says something different. You can go and search through any number of those apps to dare, in fact, hopefully find a movie for free. Or if you have the money, you can go and pay for this film, or maybe you already have it anyway somewhere in your collection because it's freaking Titanic. Like, it's a movie that people could not have escaped for a certain time period of time. Even when you're in school, you hear about the Titanic. And you're like, but what about them French girls? And they're like, no. What about them French girls? No. So, let's go on. Maybe, like, I'm kind of wondering if anybody, like, was to have gone on and gotten a girlfriend by watching Titanic. I'm curious about that. Like, if anybody was to go and, like, hey guys, let's see Titanic, is like, smooch. I wonder that. I have curiosities about, like, because they're, like, you couldn't have escaped this movie. And so maybe all of a sudden, weirdly in some way, this movie was a way for you to go on and tell somebody, like, let's be boyfriend girlfriend kind of thing. But who knows? Let's go on to our way to say that it's about that time yet again to go into that double five. Let's just go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So at the very beginning of the right out of the gate, I have blah blah blah. So we of course have Bill Paxton's character called Brock Levitt, who is going on and being one of these guys who is to be this excavator, who is to be in this mini sub, and he's like, oh, well, in 1912, this ship had sunk, and we are to be going on our way to see it from where it has now sunken from the, of course, skies below. And we have this one guy who's behind Brock, who's just laughing. It's like, God, you were such foolish. Like, good God, man. So Brock goes on and is to mention how far down they are. Should go on and try to look inside this Titanic and how it could be a possibility that the windows that they have could possibly break and this sub could possibly sink. And then he's like, oh, okay, like I think I've covered all the bullshit that I can for today. That there's so much risk and there's so much things involved of this whole search of this Titanic, which they've done numerous times over and over again. So we go on and we have a robot called Duncan being put, of course, in to, of course, search certain decks of this ship, going on and searching the D deck, the reception area, dining saloon, and I think that's it. So we go on and, of course, have Lovett, who is to go on and search through a certain person's home or a certain person's place where they slept, and not quite sure who exactly that was because I didn't catch it. But eventually they go and they try to flip this door over to then get a safe out of it. And they're like, ooh, like this sounds like something that we're going to make something out of this. So it probably had to be Hockley's place or Cal's place, the Billy Zane character, the villainous character, because they found this safe that is to be like in his room. So we go on and we have these guys who are like, all right, like, here's what we've been uh, writing this whole exploration on, is finding this, of course, one diamond, this blue diamond, and they're going on and like saying how um, like in depth it is, and so on and so. We all of a sudden have, of course, Brock's character who has this safe be cracked open. And so he's starting to thumb through the stuff and he finds Bub Kiss Nothing. And he's like, oh man, like the diamond's not in here? Like this sucks. So they go on and they try to restore all of the stuff that was damaged in that vase. And they go on and they end up finding Rose's photo of her basically with the diamond and her basically without clothes on because she's not exactly a French girl. So all of a sudden, here's a weird, goofy thing that I don't quite understand about this movie is we then have Brock going and doing a news report, and I'm like, they seriously put this on TV. Where is this TV station? And, like, why don't I have it? Why don't I have this TV station? Because Brock is doing this interview and showing the picture of the woman, and they don't censor anything out. They don't blur anything out. And so we end up having the old Rose, who is to go on and I guess weirdly figure out easily, like especially during this time period, how exactly to contact Brock and to tell him it's like, well, hey, like, did you guys never find the blue diamond? Because of course you won't, because I have it. Like, she doesn't tell them that, but like eventually they might find it as we have a kerplunk at the end of this film. So we have Brock going and answering this phone, and the guy that's telling Brock that this woman is calling as they're still on this this boat here. The guy tells him it's like, well, yeah, like she can't really hear that well because she's like 101. So they go on and they tell us here that this girl has to be 101 and that this probably isn't going to be like, there's no way that this girl is really legitimately the person that she says she is, that she's probably fibbing here, that she's probably making up the fact that she was to be this this person, of course, because she was an actress and that she had gone on and married some guy and popped out a couple kids, which never actually happened. So we, as I'm trying to find freaking names or faces here, doesn't matter. So we go on, and of course, we have this Rose who is to go and tell them her story because Brock, of course, is to say, well, hey, like she knew about the blue diamond and she didn't have to ask us about it. She already knew about it. So, like, that's the dead accuracy right there, that this has to be this woman in this picture because she had it when she was, of course, drawing it, because there's a date on this photo, or there's a date on this portrait. So we now, of course, go on and we have now Brock going even further on Rose and is to say, like, okay, well, who had the blue diamond originally? And we have it, of course, with Rose mentioning that a guy who is to go on and own the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Brock is like, you're correct, because supposedly there was to be an insurance claim by this diamond going missing, and evidently he had gotten his money back. Because we had Cal, who's very smart about this, and he was telling everybody to take pictures of everything because he knew that at some point they were going to lose it. And so hopefully he kept whatever camera that they used to take all those photos, because man, would have sucked if he wouldn't have been able to claim all that stuff off, or maybe he just claimed it anyways. You would have thought it would have been a good idea if they would have gone on and like claimed all that stuff ahead of time, because mistakes can happen, can go down. But I guess they were so like, well, this is an unsinkable ship. So we go on and we have Rose, who is to, of course, tell her story here. And so really we open with them going on and making it to the Titanic. And so Rose here was to mention that this is to, of course, have been the Ship of Dreams. But Rose was to go on and say that really she was a slave to come in here on chains, to be forced to come onto this boat to America, because both her mother, who is Ruth, and Cal, of course, wanted her to come to America. So she's like, well, I guess I should come on Titanic. So we go on and we have a lot of people being checked for lice to make it onto this boat. And so we have both Jack and another guy named Fabrizio that are, of course, before this Titanic is to leave, they go on and they are playing poker against these guys named Sven and Olaf. I think Olaf. And so they go on and they're playing cards for these Titanic tickets that are just so Titanic, it's unreal. So we, of course, go on, and one of the guys is to have just two pair, and we have Jack, who has a full house. So he wins the Titanic tickets, and so Jack is telling Fabrizio that, like, hey, like, you're not gonna see your mom for a while because you're going to America, full house. Never, and all of a sudden there's like a fight breaking out, and so Jack and Fabrizio scramble because they only have 5 minutes to make it to the Titanic. So they're scrambling onto this boat, lying to these people, saying that they had been already checked for lice, and so they go onto this boat, and so we end up having Rose, who, of course, has all of these paintings by a guy named, oh my God, I want to say, God, I knew it like a minute ago. Let me pause here for a second. Picasso. I was like, what is the paintings? I'm like, what? Like, it's not like Chopin, it's Picasso. And I was like, yeah, because, and so we have Cal, who's going on like, yeah, like, Rose was to get these Picasso paintings when he was early drawing these out. And so Cal was going on and he's like, yeah, like this guy will go nowhere. I'm like, yeah, of course, in a time period piece, you have to just mention that somebody's going nowhere because that's the joke of things where it's like, oh, yeah, like just ridicule Picasso or ridicule some big artist because why not? Why not make that joke? So, but I'm kind of curious if they ever like found any actual Picasso paintings, hence why they are, of course, to mention that they were in this film, because that just seems like a random thing that they could have made fun of for that time period. So we go on and we have Rose, who of course is to have everything just kind of like deflated by Hal, so to speak, or like just uh, have it where Cal like is to consistently have Rose like be a person that's like, you don't know what you're talking about. So we of course have Rose go on, and she is to go to dinner, and or maybe it's a breakfast. Yeah, maybe it's a breakfast. Maybe it's some kind of meal of some sort where Rose and Cal and Ruth are to go all to dinner, with, of course, a woman named Molly. And so it seems that in or during this meal, it seems that both Rose and Cal have a disagreement, to where, of course, Cal gets upset. And so Rose just decides to leave this diner, and so we have Molly who's telling Cal, it's like, well, hey, like you better kind of straighten out that girl, kind of thing. Like you better get a good like wrangle on that girl, kind of thing, uh, or otherwise you're probably going to lose her, so to speak. So we go on, and we have, of course, Jack, who of course is meeting up with a guy named Tommy Ryan with Fabrizio, because we have, of course, Jack that's going and sketching some people, and Tommy is to ask Jack. It's like, well, hey, like, do you get much money from this? Like, do you get any money from like just sketching people? And I think Jack just really wants the practice, and since there's so many people here, he might as well just like consistently keep his hand warm, to just kind of keep sketching. So all of a sudden, we have Rose, who is to come out onto the deck for both Fabrizio, Tommy, and Jack to see here. And Tommy's looking at Jack and like, ooh, this woman. And Tommy's like, dude, there's no way you're getting that girl. Like you might as well just learn how to fly. Like, you might as well, like, because like there's no way you're getting that one. So we of course go on, and sometime later we have, of course, Rose, who is to just be just kind of fed up with her life already upon this boat. And so she decides that she is going to jump off of it. Basically, going on to one end of this boat to then decide whether or not she wants to jump off this boat. Where all of a sudden, Jack is on some bench of this boat, realizing that Rose is going to jump off this boat, and so he's trying to convince her not to, telling her that if she's going to jump off this boat, that he is also going to jump off after her, and that she doesn't realize how cold it is, because Jack was to go and fish in Wyoming, and he, of course, to know that you being in this kind of cold of water is to kind of like this kind of comparison here is to kind of foreshadow us, to tell us like how bad it's going to be for these people later on in this film, because of course it's cold. Like there's icebergs ahead, so why wouldn't this be a freaking cold esh like place? Wouldn't that be an easy assumption? So, but we have Jack going on and mentioning how like falling into this water is like a ton of knives that are to stab into you, because of how just hurtful it would be to just swim in this water. And so the more and more that Jack is trying to convince Rose to not do this, as Jack is to slowly take off his coat and to take off his boots, which will eventually bring that up later, all of a sudden Rose is to slip and is to be screaming out loud for help. And so Jack is to go on and grab her. And we just consistently have these moments where Jack is like, I'm not going to let go. We also like let me go forward in this movie one bit, because this is technically spoilers now. The one thing where we have the most iconic scene where Jack is mentioning like warm in your bed as an old woman, warm in your bed is how you're going to die. That whole scene, I realized, is actually to be stolen and copied and pasted to be used in a scary movie where we have both the main girl of that film and we have her love interest being stuck in this freezer, and we have the boyfriend who's like, oh god, I'm so cold. And so she ends up just jerking him off weirdly and is saying that he's going to die an old man warm in his bed. And I'm like, oh my god, they reuse this scene. I can say jerking it because really when looking at it, like, we have French girls in this movie, so technically this movie isn't exactly catered for a young audience. Because it isn't, unless people don't realize that. Or they have the edited version of this movie from a VHS somewhere, or something along those lines. Maybe there is a much more kid-friendly version of Titanic. I don't know. Really, I don't think there should be, because there's a lot of brutal deaths that happen at the end of this film. But anyways, pushing on. Kid-friendly for it's a brutal movie. So, it's true. So, we go on and we have Rose, who of course is to be kind of gone back onto the boat with the help of Jack, but then all of a sudden we have a number of people that are thinking like, oh, like, he got on top of her. He's, like, he was forcing himself on her because coats are being tossed and boots are on the ground. And so they're like, oh, hey, like, let's arrest this guy. But then all of a sudden, when Cal and his trusty protege, Spicer Lovejoy, did they even bother having a name for this guy? The guy who is, of course, more notably from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze, where, of course, he goes on and is to, like, make the ooze, and, yeah, anyway, to make the anti-ooze, and so on and so forth. The TGRI guy, anyways, pushing on. So, we go on and have these guys like, yeah, like, book them, Dano. But then all of a sudden Rose is going to say, wait a minute, like, she ends up telling this story and how this all played out. How Jack was going on and trying to save her quickly because he didn't realize that she was to, of course, be slipping. And so they're like, well, is that the real story here, Rose? And Jack, is that the real story? And Jack's like, yeah, like, that's what really happened. So they're going on and they're like, oh, okay. But then Spicer, Lovejoy, goes over to Jack and, of course, is like, it's kind of weird that you were able to get your coat off and your shoes off right before this woman was to, of course, to fall. Like that, there's something about that doesn't seem all quite that right. But Lovejoy never goes back to it. So we go on and, of course, have Jack, who's a freaking cheapskate. Or Jack? We have Cal. We have Cal, who's a super cheapskate here, is telling Lovejoy, it's like, hey, give Jack $20 for saving my wife. Because technically Cal is engaged to Rose in this film. They don't get engaged during this thing, like, they're actually already engaged. So Cal's like, hey, give him $20. And Rose is like, really? $20 for saving my life? And so Cal is like, well, okay, Jack, you can come to our dinner table and regale us with your heroic tale, which I'm sure is going to have so many details that are going to have us question things. Like, I don't know if this story feels all that accurate. I don't know about that. So Jack then is to go on and spend more time with Rose. Is to really just go on and is to show her his sketches and of all of her French girls, who I guess at one point he had, of course, paid them to be drawn because it seemed there was one girl that he was just so fascinated with her hands, much more so than the rest of her bate. Evidently, this girl was to have uh, a prosthetic leg, or to not have a part of her leg. Uh, from the way of which that Jack was to talk about her. So we end up finding out that Jack was previously in France, and or from Paris. Paris, it shouldn't matter. But so Jack is to go on and now have Rose and Jack kind of wondering like what they're actually going to do in America, like what they should actually learn how to do. And they start talking in this kind of this southern accent. They start talking like this, and so they end up mentioning that like, well, hey, like we should learn how to spit. And Rose is like, I don't know how to spit. And so Jack and Rose, this is the grossest scene of this whole freaking film, where they're like showcasing how to spit in this movie. I'm like, this is gross. This has turned into those like kind of weird, ugly animes that no one likes because they always complain about this kind of thing. Um, but yeah, so all of a sudden we have both of these guys just in and out, and God, that's so gross. And and I know a lot of people that's their peeve or their whatever. They're just like, I know, don't tell me about that scene. I hate it. Simply because they don't like stuff like I don't like scenes like that. I don't even watch stuff like that. That's so. Every time I've seen a movie and there's that scene, I'm like, I'm not watching that. That's freaking gross. Like I don't want to see somebody doing that and something. You know that's something. You know. So we go on and all of a sudden we have Rose's mother Ruth and Molly going on to find both Jack and Rose, who are just having fun, flinging it out, so to speak. So, flinging it out, what does that mean? What they were doing. So, all of a sudden, now Ruth is to want Rose to get ready for this gala, this balla, this whatever, this danza, this thinga that they're doing, where they're wearing all nice clothes that are just to be for them to just eat at some dinner? Like, what is the point of getting all dressed up to just go to dinner? I guess that's just the way of the times. That is the, like, man, you have to put so many freaking clothes on just for what? Like a meal that's probably going to only be like less than 30 minutes in length? It seems so odd to me, but I guess you have to have like a dinner jacket or something. Man, those people, they wasted a lot of time for a 24-hour day, let's be honest. They had to put a lot of freaking layers on to just die of probably freaking. You would have thought like there would be no way for any of those people to have frozen in this movie, for how many layers that they could have possibly been put on before going on and drowning in this water. You would have thought they would have had like a billion freaking layers on and they would not have sunk. But then again, when really looking at it, it's like, well, if you put a ton of layers on, you would probably sink more and more. You'd probably have to just only be wearing, but still, you could have come up with something. You could have come up with a kind of some kind of flotation device coming out of all that clothes. You know what I'm saying? So, anyways, pushing on. So, Molly is to take a certain interest into Jack and just be like, you know what? Like, you look like my son. It looks like my son's clothes can fit you. So here's his tux. So Jack is to go on, and luckily this tuxedo is to fit him perfectly, which is like, okay, come on. Like, you couldn't have had it to where like it doesn't fit whatsoever, or it's like severely tight, because I would have wanted Jack to just be miserable in these clothes. Because I feel like it's like it was a thing that was probably tailor made for Jack. But anyways, so we go on and we have Jack, of course, who is to go with Molly to this dinner, and so we of course have Rose telling Jack, it's like, well, hey, like, or we have kind of Molly kind of giving him the kind of the setup to kind of help him figure out what's going on here. And so Molly is going and telling Jack, it's like, well, hey, like, kind of make people believe you have a gold mine, and they'll treat you like one. And so we have Jack who's kind of going in here, and people are asking like what kind of like school he went to, and Jack, of course, to make up some kind of similar school to one of the guys that is asking. He's like, "Oh yeah, I think I've heard that somewhere." Liar! You liar! I don't think that's true. I don't think that's a place because I lived there. Anyways, so Jack goes on and is kind of schmoozing everybody, kind of working all these stories. And so, but we kind of have Ruth that is going on and trying to ping on Jack to just say, like, well, you're a poor guy. Like you don't have like a home to your name, and like, where, like, how can you like see your life? And Jack is mentioning, it's like, well, hey, like there's one day where like I feel like a king in the world, and then there's other days where I'm just sleeping on a bench somewhere. It's like kind of thing, because we end up having Jack and Fabrizio who go on to the one kind of part of the ship, of course, to be the very front part of the ship. And of course, we end up having them do the king of the world kind of thing, which, man, was that thing just like people used it heavily when this movie came out. It was like, king of the world, King Kong ain't got nothing on me, and so on and so forth. But man, that king of the world thing, like we like used it heavily. There were so many things that we just kind of, everybody was like king of the world for whatever goofy reason. And plus, like that whole thing that when anybody was on like a boat, they had to do that one thing. That, oh my God, Jack, I'm flying. I feel like I'm flying, Jack. As Jack is to have Rose go into the front of the ship, and like he's to tell her what to do, and then he's like, oh my God. Or Rose is like, oh my God, we're flying. It feels like it. So I feel like there's a lot that I'm kind of leaving hanging here, but oh well, we're gonna just continue to go on to this same route of things. So we have, of course, Jack and Rose, who are to eventually leave this dinner, um, because Cal is decided, like, well, hey, me and all these guys are gonna go and talk politics and drink brandy and have cigars, and heaven forbid we have Jack go on and do that, because it'll be a waste of time for him to be in any of that kind of dialogue, because he doesn't know about any of that stuff, because he's not in that kind of world. Is what Cal's really telling Jack here. So Jack is just like, well, I'm just gonna go with my people, and like we're gonna have real fun. Because Jack, of course, is to give Rose a note that is to tell her, it's like, well, hey, like, make your moments count kind of thing. Meet me at the clock. So Rose goes on and meets Jack, and is to have Jack show Rose his world where they're going on, and having this kind of get together of dancing and drinking and so on and so forth. So we have both Jack and Rose who are kind of just dancing it out in this probably heavily choreographed scene here. And so we have this like piece of wood where they're dancing, where it just kind of like it like really gets on to where it seems like they're tap dancing, but they're not, because the wood is just like clunk clunk clunk, to where it like feels like they are tap dancing. So all of a sudden we have Rose kind of seeing some guys who are uh, kind of like showcasing something, and Rose is just like, well, hey, like you guys aren't as strong as if you can do this. And so Rose goes on and does this like kind of one like ballet move where she's kind of pointing her toes and like raising them a certain way, and she's doing this one ballet move, but then she ends up falling over, and she's like, whoop, like I haven't done that in such a long time, kind of reminding herself when she was a younger Rose. So we go on and we have this kind of party, this kind of play here. So we, of course, at some point have Cal, when Rose is to come back to him. Cal, of course, is to remind Rose that she is engaged to him, and like of course as per usual he just likes to fling and break stuff just to kind of prove his point. Never hurts Rose in this movie, but just kind of like flings around in anger because that's what he just loves to do. So we go on and have Rose just kind of continue to run off away from Cal or her family because she hates them. So we at some point have both Jack and Rose who are together, and now we have a certain plethora of things set up here. We have at one point where Rose is to also talk about the guy who invented the ship called Thomas Andrews, and he is to mention how this boat was built, and mentioning about the lifeboats, on how supposedly there were to be a lot more lifeboats on this boat, but he was outvoted for how many lifeboats could be on this boat at one time. So it's like, well, hopefully this boat doesn't sink. And we really have it to where like they're re-cementing how unsinkable this boat is. We also have Bruce Ismay that's going and talking to Captain Smith and mentioning how like he really wants these reporters to have something to write about this ship, that this ship isn't just a big massive boat of a thing. Now Bruce wants these people to write that this ship is to be fast also. And Captain Smith is like, I don't want to rush through anything. Like, I just want to get there when we get there. Because, like, we really just have Captain Smith, who after this voyage is retiring. So he's like, like, I want to get there as slow as humanly possible as long as we get there. Because, like, I don't trust these people to just... It seems like everybody's just trying to figure out how they can get money off this boat. And they have to also figure out like how safe this boat really needs to be. So going on here, so we push on to have, of course, Jack and Rose here. They're just kind of looking on to all of a sudden see these icebergs, and we of course have the guy who is to be spotting where they are to be going next. And I'm like, you know what, isn't this kind of like dangerous to have had these people at nighttime be boating through icebergs? Like, shouldn't they have just waited till the night and just like kind of like sleeped it off to just like, hey, we're not going to go through this place until day. Like, this is too dangerous. But like, I guess they just wanted to just rush to get there so badly that they made mistakes along the way. So the guy that was supposed to be like the guy looking out to just kind of see where things are going, we have this guy who is to have forgotten his binoculars. I'm like, How many mistakes are going to be happening during this movie where everybody's like, oh yeah, I forgot, like, how I forgot this one piece of something, or I forgot that this is going to lead to a lot of people's deaths because I don't have this one thing. It's basically what this movie is. Pretty much. So, we now, of course, have the guy who is to spot where they are heading, is to, of course, ring a ding ding on a phone to tell everybody, hey, iceberg right ahead. You're probably not going to have enough time to maneuver, so we're going to die here. So they try to turn, and I think they're taking their sweet A time to do so. And so they, of course, end up scratching against this iceberg. We have both Jack and Rose who are noticing that this iceberg, of course, is too close. We had at one point a expert that, of course, was with Brock, who was going on and showing Rose exactly how the Titanic had sunk, and Rose is just like, "Well, that's great." Like, as as right before she is to go on and tell them her story about how things had gone on that ship, before, of course, she was to possibly pass away in her sleep, telling us this last story about the Titanic. So we have Rose, who is to we have both Jack and Rose who are aware of there's a possibility that this boat is starting to sink, and so now that this thing has happened, a crash in this boat is to all of a sudden have everybody be awake and alerted, because we have Captain Smith going on and telling guys to send out a mayday, and supposedly the closest ship is 4 hours away. And he's like, 4 hours? Like, this ship is going to sink in at least like 1 or 2. So we're going to have to like come up with some kind of evacuation in that amount of time. You know what? Here's my thought process. You know what? We had Rose, who had a flotation device to lay on. You know what? For how freaking massively huge, gigantically big this ship was, shouldn't they have been able to come up with some kind of flotation devices for these people? Really, in my brain, like, that could have been one thing that they could have gone on and done. You know how many probably tables or how many number of things that they could have probably ripped off of this boat and just used it as some kind of flotation device to just have these people just kind of lay on that? As well as also Jack and Rose could have actually... Jack could have made it on the flotation device that Rose is on, even though it seemed at one point that Jack tried to get on there and he fell off because he is not a Titanic expert of how to get on this freaking piece of thing to survive, because how would he? Because equal weight and whatever, and he would probably assumed that maybe both of them would have sunk if he would have gone on that piece. Because maybe if weighting it down wouldn't have had him exactly float in the water. Because maybe Jack is a little chubby. I don't know. No offense, Leonardo DiCaprio. Young Leonardo DiCaprio. Let's say that. So, I'm trying to make jokes out of a horrible situation. So, but there should have been, like, people trying to figure something out. There are so many tables and there are so many things that they could have, like, ripped out to create things for people. That's what I would have done. I would have created my own flotation device. I would have came up with breaking off some table and like, hey man, this is my boat. this is my way out because freaking I'm not gonna die. Uh, I'm not gonna die. That's not gonna happen. I would have came up with a freaking boat. That's what I would have done. Considering I would have been like a guy that wasn't going to get onto a boat, but then we rarely have like so many things kind of break down where all of a sudden just random people all got boats. And we're just seeing a bunch of women with kids just not being able to get on a boat. And some of the boats aren't actually all filled up all that well. But let's pull back a little. So people are slowly but surely to get evacuated off the boat, but it seems like it's all like the first class people. All the people down below, it's like F all those guys. Like we're purposely having like guys that are on these ships, these officers that are basically uh like keeping like the third class people, like the poor people, they're keeping them down there to make room for all the first class people. I'm like, you pieces of garbage. Like, we even have women and children that are desperately trying to get in there to be saved. And they're like, well, no, F you guys. Like, you guys had your chance. Like, you guys are pretty much going to die because of, like, how much money you have in your pocket. Because you're not the high class society, so you're going to die. So, so we go on here and we have both Jack and we have Rose. And so we have both Jack and Rose go on and at some point are to meet back up with Thomas Andrew, who's telling them, it's like, well, hey, like, remember what I told you about the lifeboats? It's like, hey, go on and try to get a lifeboat and try to get it as quickly as possible. Or otherwise, like, you aren't going to get one. So please hurry. Like, we have certain guys trying to do the best they can to try to help people and find everyone on the ship to get them like either woken up or get them out of here. Like there's a lot of good people in this even though they made a big massive mistake. Like there are people that try to do their best here and try to save people. But then there is this awful kind of breakdown of when these people are to make it onto these boats. And we have certain boats that are to be sent down far too quickly. Like we have Thomas Andrew who's telling this officer, it's like, well, hey, like one of these boats don't obviously have enough people. Like supposedly there's a boat that can fit like 70 some odd people, and there was one boat that went down that had like 12 in it. Like this makes no sense. And the officer's just like, well, we don't know like how many people can actually fit in this boat. And like you would have think Thomas would have told these people like right out of the get-go like how many people can fit in this boat. You should have had every single officer be aware of that information and have some kind of like safety drill of a thing. But like there's so many people that were kind of clueless here that are just like, hey man, like since I'm not going on this boat, like who cares how many people's going on it? Everybody's gonna all die anyways. So we end up having this kind of this band, of course, violins and cellos and uh, wood instruments going on and playing. And so weirdly, as this ship is getting evacuated, they're going on and they're playing this very like upbeat, happy kind of song. I'm like, man, these guys are weird. So, oh, the one thing that I think I'm jumping the gun on a lot of stuff here, so let's backpedal a little bit. I had forgotten about the whole romance scene that eventually, after that night between both Jack and Rose, where they're dancing, we end up having Rose, who is to go on and want Jack to sketch her like the French girls. And so Rose to go on and disrobe, and Jack, of course, is to sketch her, and that's when eventually they are to find that sketch. So we have Cal who goes on to find this sketch, and so we have Jack found with Rose, and so we of course have Lovejoy who plants uh, the blue diamond on Jack so he can get arrested, and they implant that on him, and they end up taking also off Jack's jacket and find out that that actually doesn't belong to him either. And Jack was like, "Hey, I was just borrowing this. I was going to give this back to this person." And they're like, "Sure, sure, you thief." So we have Jack go and get arrested, and so Rose now has to go on and figure out where Jack is instead of thinking about how she can get off of this boat. So Rose, of course, is to ask Thomas, Andrew, of course, where, if anyone was to get arrested, where would they go? So Rose goes on to go and find where Jack is, and is to have to use this axe to try and smack these cuffs so that way Jack can get free. And so Jack is telling Rose to take some practice swings, and she is to supposedly hit the same place twice, and she doesn't do all that well. So then she luckily is able to hit the uh, the cuffs with the chain and free Jack. So we go on and we have Jack asking Rose, like, well, hey, like, did anybody tell you, like, that the truth about what had happened? And Rose is just like, no, like, I believed that, that you weren't actually this thief. That, like, I believed you much more so than I believed them. So we go on and we have Jack and Rose who are in this lower level, starting to drown because we go on and we have both Jack and Rose who are to try and escape out of this location to be forced back by all these officers, and we have guys like Fabrizio and Tommy that are desperately telling these people, hey, people are going to die down here. We have women and children. And so we go on and we have Jack with all of these, with his friends and Rose, to go to another section that is to be closed off. And so they rip out this one bench, and now they're slamming this bench against this door to break this door for them to get the heck out of there. So we go on at one point and have both Jack and Rose going on and finding this one kid, and all of a sudden, like, they grab this kid and they're kind of running with this kid. All of a sudden, his father is to show up and just grab this kid, but he ends up going into one part of this boat where the door, of course, is to be gushing in with water. And so I'm assuming, sadly, both this kid and this father die. And so Jack and Rose are just kind of running to a certain section where they're yelling for some guy with these keys to open this one gate. Which I'm like, man, like, why would they have shut all of those doors? Like, shouldn't all those be open? Like, that seems like a horrible thing to do. That seems like the one inaccurate thing that just doesn't make sense to me. Because what does the door really do there? Like, it doesn't keep the water out. what what good does that do? Besides just giving us some good action moments in this film. So the guy, of course, is to drop the keys. Jack is to go and have to try to open up this door, and luckily he does in the nick of time. So we have at some point both Jack and Rose together, and Cal is slowly starting to realize that, one, he's losing his woman, and two, that he's probably going to die. So, like, all bets are off. And so Jack goes on and whips out this gun and is to fire upon Jack and Rose, and that leads them to go down into the section where we end up finding that kid and that man who died. Like I kind of had to reverse that scene there in my mind, like because I forgot about that, but I wanted to push that back in. Because I'm like, okay, how does this all get set up? Because Jack and Rose go up to eventually have to be forcibly going back down, and then find that kid. So we go on here, and so now everybody's at the top level here, and so eventually we start to get people on these boats, and so Rose at one point is to get on one of these boats, and we have, of course, Cal telling Jack, it's like, well, hey, like, I'm going to get off this boat because I paid somebody off. And because Cal's like, well, yeah, because I always win, because I'm just better than you. So I'm going to get back with Rose. Haha, sucks to be you. And so Rose goes on and jumps out of this boat because she's like, well, like, if Jack doesn't make it, I don't make it. Because they're both in love, because they went in to one car and just was banging it out, supposedly. Here's the weird thing. So we have, like, we only have the Celine Dion song kind of laced throughout this movie because I guess they just didn't have the money for music in this film, or much of a soundtrack. They didn't put much of the effort because they already spent a load of this money on this movie anyways, where James Cameron was supposed to work for free on some other film after this movie was done with because he spent so much succulent money on this. So, but I'm also kind of forgetting the whole, like, the Brock and older Rose story of things. But a lot of that doesn't really matter to me. The only thing that actually matters is the thing that is to be, like, towards the end of the film. So I'm not really going to cover any of that stuff because it doesn't feel all that important. It just kind of feels like there's a lot of people either crying or just captivated by this story, or there's just a lot of people that are to kind of make a butt of a joke at some point, where a lot of people are asking, it's like, well, hey, what's next? And old Rose is like, well, like, of course, like we both like slept together. Of course we did. And like, oh yeah, that's what they did. So because everybody's just so hooked and captivated by this story, kind of even wondering if really Brock even like had enough tape to record this whole thing when he kind of hit the record on that one recorder thing. So now Rose is to jump back onto the boat, and Jack is like, "Why did you do that? You're stupid, Rose!" As he's like heavily kissing her, because like we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it both together, or we're just not. So Cal goes on and does a horrible thing by going on and finding some girl and is to tell some guy that it's all that she's all that he's all that she has, and one captain or one officer is to let this guy on this boat and have Cal pretend that this child is his. Because we had Cal go on and pay this one officer off, and when Cal was to go on and see, like, hey, like, I paid you off, right? And so we end up having this officer who takes all this money and flings it back at Cal, saying, like, well, this money is no good for either me or for you, so you wasted your time trying to pay me off because I'm not going to take this payout. So all of a sudden, the officer because these guys are getting guns out, they're firing at people, they're like, damn you, like, back off. So we have a lot of these guys who are going on and like telling people to not try and get on these boats because they're going to regret it. So because they're still waiting for any number of women and children to still be coming here to get off of this boat. So we go further into here to have, of course, the officer going and accidentally shooting Tommy, and then decides to then shoot himself, and because they're gonna die anyways, might as well just I guess die quicker, horrifically. So we go on and we still have this band who's playing all this cheery music where it doesn't really make any sense anymore. But then they're realizing that this boat is going to sink, and so they're starting to play this kind of like really this kind of very slow, kind of like sad song. And we have Captain Phillips who goes into his ship, uh, and someone's giving him a life belt, this kind of life preserver, and he just decides to just go into his captain's office and is to just kind of like eventually wait until the water is to come in for him to just like take it, because he realizes that he should be going down with the ship because he's the captain and he's technically retiring anyways. So we have, of course, the other guy who is wanting to tell this captain, like, hey, we need to go faster, we need to go this. This guy decides, like, hey, heck yeah, I'm going to go on this boat. I'm going to go on one of these boats because I think I've gotten to everybody. So F it, I'm going to go and get off this boat, because I don't want to die. And so we have the one guy who is kind of greedy about, like, oh, what is the news going to say about this boat? Yeah, he gets freaking out of there. We have Thomas Andrew that I don't think ends up ever getting on a boat. He just wants everybody else to, because he realizes how many few people are there. We end up having one guy who is to be told to get a life belt, and he just goes on and he's like, well, no, like, I'm just gonna just kind of I'm just gonna wait this whole thing out. Like, I'm just gonna go ahead and just, if we're gonna drown, we're gonna drown. And this guy is Guggenheim, and so this guy is mentioning, it's like, to the one guy that's giving him a life belt. He's like, well, I wouldn't mind a brandy, and I'm like, what an a-hole! Like, this ship is like going down, and all you're thinking about is alcohol. Shouldn't you have just had that on you already? Because F it, man, you're going down with the ship anyways. Um, but he's asking some random guy for a brandy while the ship's going down. Like, yeah, I'm sure he's gonna go and run to get one of those. So, but this guy ends up seeing his demise coming. He sees the water quickly coming in, and he's like, "Oh, all right. Like, I guess I'm gonna die here now. I guess this is really happening." So, uh, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I need to backpedal about here. So, so we go on, and we have certain people that are just like going at some point of the ship and deciding to just jump off. And a lot of this doesn't quite make sense for me for how they're all jumping off at some points. It's like, shouldn't you have picked the lowest height of jumping and then jumped then? Like, I get it, certain people could fall off this ship by accident, but like, man, it seems like a lot of people are taking the highest place to jump off of, and that, like, did they just want to just like kill over anyways? Like, because we have kind of both Rose and Jack that are mentioning about like the height of them falling is to, of course, be like a possible death. But then Jack is like, oh no, maybe it's really just gonna probably just be really cold for you. So we go on, and now we have the boat breaking in half, and it's having its second half at some point just kind of falling. The propellers are falling on people, and this boat is probably crushing a lot of people. There are certain parts of this boat that is to be falling off the boat, that is to crush and kill and hurt a lot of people. So, but we then go on and now have the already sunken part of the ship now having the other half kind of much more tilting to this part. So both Jack and Rose are running up this other part of the boat, and their strategy is just to hang on to the boat for as long as humanly possible, while we just have a lot of people who are just strategizing to go on and like be praying with this preacher, and then this preacher is holding on to this table while all these people are holding on to this preacher, and I'm like, oh my god, like this preacher I'm sure is to like have his arm ripped off by holding on to all of these people, or eventually he's just not going to be able to hold on to them anymore, because him holding on to this table is not going to probably work out all that well because he's holding on to all of these people. So we we go on here and we have the strategy to have both Jack and Rose now holding on to the one place that they met, and Rose mentions this, and I'm like, man, this seems like an awkward thing to bring up, that it's like, hey Jack, this is where we met. They're like, yeah, and here's where we're probably gonna die, so shush. So all these women are now like hanging on to this spot here. Rose is just kind of looking at other people, spotting them as if like she's gonna find a familiar face here. And so we have, of course, Jack, who's realized that he's like, okay, we need to go and flip around to kind of just hold on to this ship as it's going down now, to where everybody's just kind of hanging as much as they can onto the end of this boat. And some people start to lose their grip and fall to their deaths and smack into a part of this boat. I'm like, oh my god, like this is awful. So eventually the whole boat sinks, and so now the strategy of it is that there's certain people like Molly, who is to help out Jack before, who is going on and now being so tempted to have more people on these lifeboats. And we have the one officer who's with Molly who's like, shut up, like, you know what, if you keep talking like this, there's going to be one less person on this boat, and that's going to be you. Because this officer is thinking if they have more people on this boat, that they're just gonna like swamp them or they're gonna drown them. And so actually I'm really doing actually pretty dang good time for this movie, I think, being like what, like 3 hours and change and something. And I know I'm probably forgetting about a billion things with this movie, but holy crap, I'm like really like impressed on on what I'm doing for time, because I'm really just not talking about most of the Brock stuff and not covering most of that. But I'm feeling good about that. I feel good. Like I'm not covering every single detail, but I'm just covering the big important stuff. So, but we have one officer who, of course, is to be most famously known as the guy who's Mr. Fantastic from the original Fantastic Four movies. Fifth Officer Lowe is to go on and put people into other lifeboats to then go back to try to rescue people that they find out that most of them are freaking frozen by the time that they wait, because they had waited too long to go back for them. So we have both Jack and we have both Rose, uh, who are, of course, finding this little piece to float on, and Rose, of course, is to get on it, and then Jack is trying to, but he falls out of it. So Rose goes on to really at some point with Jack almost feel like they're going to give up or they're going to die here. And Jack is like, no, like, we're going to make it. Like, if anything, like, tell me you're going to survive. Like, tell me you're going to die an old woman warm in her bed. And tell me you're not going to let go. And Rose is like, I won't let go, Jack. I won't let go. So when the people are to, of course, make it back and start looking for people, and they're like, hey, like, make sure, like, you don't really injure these people while smacking into them because maybe they might still be alive. Like, check all these corpses to make sure they're all dead, and like, kind of make sure you're not hurting anybody by trying to, like, make your way through here. So a lot of people are all frozen and all dead because hypothermia and whatever. So we go on and we have Rose, who's all of a sudden just kind of like humming this one song of sorts, maybe the theme song to Titanic. And so we go on here and we have the guys kind of shouting like, hey, is anyone alive out there? Can anyone hear me? And so all of a sudden Rose is to not be able to, like, talk really. She's talking to Jack and she's saying like, Jack, they're here. And so she's trying to, like, wake up Jack, and Jack is freaking dead. So Rose just goes on and is to drop Jack into the water because he's dead anyways. So, but Rose is to confirm to Jack that she'll still never let go. So Jack goes on to fall into the water, and so Rose goes and is to go and grab this whistle, where she, of course, is to blow out the whistle to let these guys know that she is the only one still left alive. We rarely had the one guy with the one whistle who was, like, whistling to, like, bring the boats back. Like, bring the boat. Like, yeah, like, they are to really give a about these people. Like, hey, man, like, you had plenty of time to get a boat, or you had plenty of time to just die. It's like, sorry, sucks to be you, but, like, this is your fate. So Rose, of course, is to get retrieved and put on this boat called the Carpathia, and immediately in my mind I was like, Vigo the Carpathian? Like, immediately, like, Ghostbusters 2 somehow came in here. And then when really looking at it, in Ghostbusters 2 we had the Titanic reference anyways, so that works out. Better late than never. If you guys, like, check out the YouTube video, because I'm sure there's one exists, about Ghostbusters 2 and the Titanic, where you have, like, the guy who is Cheech from Cheech and Chong was going on and telling the one guy, it's like, well, better late than never, like, because I've seen that movie a billion times. But yeah, they're telling the guys, it's like, well, the Titanic just arrived. So yeah, so, like, weirdly, I guess they had to relate Carpathian and Titanic, because Carpathia was the boat that, maybe that was how they got Carpathia, was maybe, or Carpathian was maybe because of the Titanic. I don't know, it was kind of weird. Or maybe they were Google searching what they could relate to Carpathian, and I don't know, it was just a weird, goofy thing. So, let's because I'm sure this movie probably didn't come out when that movie did, but still, uh, what a ride. Anyways, so Rose is to go on and is to see Kyle kind of looking throughout the boat, trying to find if Rose is possibly on this boat, or if Jack made it on this boat. because Cal has mentioned that Rose still has that necklace in her jacket, and so that's all he really wants. It's not the girl, it's the diamond. So we of course have uh, Rose mentioning Cal's fate and how he decided to end his own life um, because of some economy thing where he decided to go off, and I think that's maybe when the stock market crashed. I'm assuming. Anyways, but Rose was to go on and have someone ask for what her name was, and she ended up saying that it was Rose Dawson. So she ended up taking Jack's last name and going off to make it to America, where she had a completely different name because I guess they didn't have things like birth certificates or IDs or whatever. You could just change your name and become a different person, I guess, at that time. And yeah, so now everybody is just so crying and so sad about this story. And so Brock is to go on with Rose's daughter and is to mention that he had the cigar raring to go when they were to get that um, diamond of the ocean or heart of the ocean, so to speak. And so now that that seems to be a thing that is never going to happen, we just have Brock who decides to go on and chuck this cigar off of this boat because it's just never going to be a thing. So Rose goes on and, of course, is to kind of wake up in the middle of the night and go and take her diamond and chuck it back into the water. And there seems to never really be a point in time where the Celine Dion song is to have at any point in part of this movie. But it's kind of so funny how we have the Celine Dion song being such like a music video and such a powerful piece of stuff and whatever, but it was never really actually used in the song or in the movie. Like we end up having it being used in the credit scene, but it's like, man, that's the power of that song, how it's like it was never actually in the film, but people just loved it because of that song. I think probably that year Celine Dion probably won an Oscar or whatever for that song. Probably. I don't know. Like, Google it and figure it out. Probably now. I figured as much. So, we go on and on. Because my heart will go on and on. Anyways, pushing on. So, really, that's just the end of it, where we just have the old Rose, who I guess is probably to die in her sleep, now that she is kind of can rest now since she told that story. So Rose all of a sudden is having this dream about her being back on Titanic, where she is to uh, re-see all of the people that had supposedly died on that ship. Even Jack, who's now like, hey, like I'm back at this clock again, and like we can go and relive this whole moment all over again, and you can still be young Rose, uh, and we can just like remember that this ship is never going to sink now because you're dreaming, or you're possibly in heaven where you had died, question mark. So with that said, I think that covers the rest of this movie. I think I'm going to get the heck out of here so I can go and fuse all this clip together, because I'm sure that's going to be a thing I'm going to have to do. So hopefully most of this movie feels covered, but at the end of the day, I also didn't go into heavy amounts of detail with certain things. There's going to be some moments that people like the most, uh, or there's going to be some points where, like, hey, you weren't all that accurate about this piece of this whatever and this something or other, and that's going to be okay, because at the end of the day, that's the point of a comment section. Uh, I love this movie. I hate this movie. I feel indifferent about this film. Okay, that's great. People could say that they hate Titanic because of its being a big, massive film. Because there are certain people that hate big, massive movies, or like they hated the fact that this movie was to be so like shoved down everyone's throats because it had to be, because it was such this like monumentous historical thing that this movie made so much freaking money that everybody's like, yeah, Titanic, it made so much money. And then all of a sudden we had Avatar come in, and that made even more money. But then Avengers Endgame just squashed that. And I was like, psh, like more money? I think so. And so that's why you probably have like James Cameron that's probably bitter about Marvel films because they're just making so much freaking money off of them, and really they're not as done as well as a James Cameron film where there is so much into it and it feels so original compared to a Marvel film that's like done just so many of them over time, and it's also just copy and pasting and stealing from a comic book event, even though this movie is to basically steal a big chunk from uh, a real life event, true story of a thing. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.